Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing. I hope that there is a universal acknowledgement that um, there has never been, and certainly in the tax reform we did, any pernicious racial intent in the sense of trying to benefit a given group at the expense of another. Such a suggestion would be untrue and frankly offensive. The idea behind the tax reform, which is, the dominant discussion about the tax code as it is today, one of the central ideas, there were several, but one of the central ideas was to lower the after tax cost of deploying capital with the notion that if we did that, we'd get an increase in the deployment of capital that would help improve productivity because really capital is the tool that's necessary for workers to become more productive. And that would enhance the economy overall, but especially for middle and lower income workers who would benefit from that. And that, of course, is exactly what happened. I think it's very, very important to underscore that it was almost immediately after we passed the tax reform that we had the best economy of my lifetime. Now, you might think that's just a big coincidence. I don't think so. I think it worked exactly as we had hoped. The capital investment did, in fact, create a boom. Workers became more productive. And Mr. Hawkins, I don't know how closely you've looked at this data, but if you have, um, could you comment on the acceleration of wages, which reached an extraordinary level just before the pandemic hit in 2019, and the wage gains that were strongest for the lowest income workers? In fact, isn't it true that since wages were growing fastest for low income workers, we were narrowing the income gap. We were narrowing the racial disparities in income by virtue of the powerful economic growth we had.
Absolutely. And so we saw wage growth. I mean, that wage growth is a direct result of a tightening labor market. When you have record unemployment rates for Asians, for Hispanics, for African Americans, for women, when you have these record unemployment rates, it tightens the labor markets, and employers have no choice but to pay more to draw people to their firms.
Right.
And we were pleased to see that a disproportionate amount of the benefit of those wage gains came at the lower end of the income spectrum.
Right. So I would just suggest, and I wish I wish this weren't controversial, but I would suggest we try to get back to the best economy of my lifetime. I would
As
suggest we try to get back to record low unemployment. I would suggest we try to get back to narrowing the income gap. Those are really good things, and we were there just a little over 1 year ago. But if we unwind the pro-growth features in our tax reform, we're not going to get back to those days. And instead, actually, one of the central ideas that some of our Democratic colleagues have is to do something that is the exact opposite of helping low-income workers, but eliminating or dramatically lifting the SALT cap. The deduction for state and local taxes of $10,000, that's already a lot. If you have $10,000 in state and local taxes, you probably have more than the median income in the United States. If you get rid of that cap entirely, the benefit flows overwhelmingly, massively to the top 1%. It's a big subsidy for working Americans to the richest Americans. Mr. Hawkins, do you see it differently, or is that what lifting the cap on the SALT tax would do?
It's exactly what it would do, and that's how I see it. That's how the Brookings Institute sees it. They noted that if the cap was lifted, almost 90%, 96% of the benefit of the SALT cap repeal would go to the top quintile. 57% would go to the top 1%, and 25% would benefit the top 0.1%. And those people in that category would get a tax cut of nearly $145,000. And so there's no intellectually honest argument to raise the salt cap if your goal is to, is to eliminate income inequality in the tax code.
No, it certainly makes it worse. And finally, let me just point out, it's not only in how it affects people, but it's the nature of the deduction, right? This is an arbitrary subsidy for people who choose to live in high tax jurisdictions. That's what it is. In those jurisdictions, you often get more services. You choose to pay for those services. I don't know whether it's trash removal or whatever else it might be. You pay for it in the form of a property tax very often, where constituents in a place that doesn't have as high a tax, they just have to contract separately. When they contract separately for those services, they don't get to deduct that payment. But if you increase the SALT tax deduction, they can. So I think I've consumed most of my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Ron, you're on mute.